Welcome back to Firewall. I'm your host, Bradley Tuss. My guest today is Leslie Feinzaig. Leslie became famous for starting something called VCs For Harris. But what's interesting is especially now that we're post-election, I think you were supposed to come on pre-election and it got moved. But it's actually better because you have done and do a lot of interesting things. And had you come on during the election, you would have been effectively a Harris surrogate making all the usual points, and that would have been pretty boring. So instead, we will talk about that, but we will talk about a lot of things, which is going to make this a more interesting podcast for both you and me and for the listeners. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm actually glad that I'm here when we can talk about like a whole bunch of things and not just be like a single topic
of which
conversation. Which was like never really like all that fun to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of those times where Leslie and I started chatting. We're at the studio here at P&T Knitwear, and we're telling the stories of our kind of immigrant Jewish families and how they both made it over from Europe into safety eventually. And then I, about 3 minutes in, stopped her and said, hold on, let's do the podcast instead. So the listeners know that we're recording P&T Knitwear, and it's a store named after a store that my grandfather started a block away from here on the Lower East Side. It was a sweater store, and kind of got my family sort of off the ground in the U.S. You have a similar story, not a knitwear story, but a kind of immigration story that has then taken another turn through you. So your family, everyone's in Europe till when?
Through at some point in the 1930s.
Okay. And where in Europe were they?
They were outside of Warsaw in Poland.
Yeah.
In like parts of Poland that at times were Polish and at times were Russian.
Okay.
So all their birth certificates are in Russian, but they're technically Polish.
Got it.
And so my grandfather, my dad's dad, he escaped the pogroms in 1929, 1930. And I was just telling you that like he came here to Ellis Island. Like they came on a boat to Ellis Island. And at the time, Congress had passed something called I believe it's the Reed-Johnson Act.
Okay.
And what that did was limit the percentage, limit immigration from any particular country to a percentage of the population from that country that was already in America at that time.
Okay.
And that was specifically targeted at Polish Jews, basically. So, right. So like they were trying to keep them out. And guess what? My grandfather made it to Ellis Island. They were closed for business. And so no more Polish immigrants allowed in America. They were turned back. They had to get back on a boat, any boat. And so they got back on a boat. There was 11 men from the same town in Poland. They get back on the boat. The boat is sailing south to Colombia, and it stopped on the way in Costa Rica. And I mean, this is lore, right? I never met my grandfather, but the story goes that the word spread in the boat about like Costa Rica. I mean, you know, it's a tiny country now. Like God knows what was there in 1930, right? Like, oh my gosh, like a village. But I guess the government in Costa Rica has always been very progressive in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the things that makes Costa Rica really special is that the first thing they did when they became a country was they split the land and gave it to everybody. So everybody was a landowner from day one. And so in a similar fashion, when these immigrants came in, the government was offering them jobs, and they had this small cash requirement to immigrate into the country. And so you only needed to show proof that you had $25 US to your name as you walked in. And now these men, you know, they were poor, like they didn't have a lot of money, but they did have $25 between all 11 of them. And so they pulled together all of their cash. And then the first guy showed it, and then he gave it to the next guy, and the second guy showed it, and he gave it to the next guy.
Any sense? Do you think the Costa Ricans knew what was going on?
God only knows. I mean, like
whatever, we're happy to have them.
They didn't speak English or Spanish. Yeah. Like I don't even know how they were communicating. Everybody's names got changed as they entered the country, right? Like all of my grandparents have two different names. One is their Polish name, and one is presumably the name that the poor Costa Rican border guy was like, all right, I think that's what I heard. Right. Like, just like write down some like Catholic name.
Fernando.
So God only knows exactly. Yeah. And so, so they immigrated to Costa Rica. The story is that he, I believe that he worked the fields at first, then he did door-to-door sales. He saved up enough money to send back for his sweetheart, my grandmother. Okay. And then slowly, two things happened. They would save money to bring more people over, and then the word would spread in these little towns in Poland, and so more and more people came.
Right.
And so most of the Costa Rican Jewish community now is from like the same two shtetls, right? Like,
what are they all? What town in Costa Rica is it in, our city?
Everybody is mostly in San Jose.
Okay.
Yeah, we grew up. I grew up in San Jose.
In San Jose.
Yeah.
How big is the Jewish population in Costa Rica?
I don't actually know. It's a few hundred families. It's sizable, but it's nothing like here in America.
Right.
It's very insular. I was very odd growing up because I did not go to the Jewish school. Like all of my siblings, everybody in the Jewish community, especially back then. There's a Jewish community. There's a Jewish school that goes like from pre-kinder all the way through high school. But when I was growing up, my aunt, she was a kindergarten teacher, and she got a job at the British School of Costa Rica, and I guess they gave us a scholarship or a discount of some kind.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, my parents moved me to the British school, and so that decision just like completely changed the direction of my life. Right?
How
like,
do you
listen
think?
To me.
So, had you gone to the Jewish school, where, if you had to guess, where are you right now?
I don't think that I would have studied abroad. I don't think I would have made it to Harvard for business school. Like that, those were the, having this exposure to a foreign education, number one. And number two, the other funny thing that it did was that it made me a permanent outsider in every part of my life. So I was like an outsider in the Jewish community because I was this odd kid who went to a different school.
Right.
And I was an outsider in the other school because I was the only Jewish kid in the school.
Right.
And so for my entire life, I was the one who didn't fit in. And that has basically just been the story of my life. And I think that it shapes you into this person that doesn't need to fit in, like doesn't need to go with the flow to like survive. Like I'm more comfortable being kind of an outsider.
So I get that because I've been the same way my whole life.
Yeah, that's why I asked you.
Right.
Like, are you a middle child?
Yeah, but here would be the not the counter, but I guess at least I know what probably exists on some level with me, which is by being the outsider, part of me always wants to stick it to the insiders, right, and disrupt them in some way, which is why in some ways VC is a great profession because like I like blowing shit up, but I think one of the reasons that I like disrupting things is because I wasn't accepted by the status quo to begin with.
I don't know that that's, I mean, probably that's my motivation. I think what it made me was like, I don't like being told what to do.
Yeah.
I'm like constitutionally allergic to FOMO. Like I don't like being sold a, bill of goods. And I think it does make me a really good VC because I just like, I don't care about fitting in. I never did. I'm fine being weird. Like I'm fine not fitting ever. And and even now, like in America, I'm culturally very different and I mask it really well now, but I make all sorts of cultural faux pas like permanently. And then in Costa Rica, like I can barely speak Spanish and like, I'm not, I just kind of, yeah. And then you just learn how to
woman without a country
do the thing. Yeah. Like you just learn how to float.
But you go to Harvard Business School, which on one hand I could see is like this, obviously like pinnacle to come from San Jose, Costa Rica. On the other hand, it's like the most normative place in the world. It's like the most elite normative place, right? Like I teach at Columbia Business School and like these kids want to fit in and have a very specific, very in many ways traditional lifestyle more than anyone I've ever met. So what was that like?
Oh, I mean, so first, let me just share that like I 100% understand what people think of me or of anyone after they graduate from HBS. Like I get it.
Right.
Having learned what I have learned since, I think it is a miracle. It is a goddamn miracle that I got into HBS. And the only reason I got in is because I killed the GMAT. Like that was it.
Right. Yeah.
I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was like in for. I decided that I wanted to leave the country. I wanted to go to school.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Did you go to college in Costa Rica?
No, I went in England. I went to the London School of Economics, right? Like British education all the way through.
Yeah.
I went back. So I graduated college in 2001.
Okay.
lost my job offer after 9/11, like no visas anywhere. And so I went back to Costa Rica. I did whatever job I could. I worked in I was a cashier at a store. I was like, worked at the call centers at Procter & Gamble, because that's the jobs that they have in Costa Rica, like service centers. I wanted to get the hell out and like have more opportunities and more things to do. I mean, I was like this very odd person. I just didn't fit in there. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I learned that the most general degree that you could get was an MBA. You could do a bunch of different things afterwards. I was like, okay, let's do an MBA. How do you do that? You have to take this test called a GMAT. I'm like, okay, great. Bought a Princeton review, studied for a month, took the GMAT, killed it. Right? Like I'm like sitting there, the score shows on the screen. I was like, holy. And the proctor, like the guy that, he like walks over, he's like, I've never seen that.
Oh, did you get the score immediately?
Yeah, you get the score immediately.
Okay.
And he's like, I've never seen that. I was like, what do I do? And he goes, have you heard of Harvard? And so I applied. I got in. I got a full scholarship. I showed up. And I felt like the admissions mistake for 2 years. I was like, people had spent their summers writing books. Every job that I've had
honestly,
since.
They're kind of the worst.
I mean, I had no idea, but like, what do you know? I was like, I like truly just, and hey, for all of the things that you're saying that are correct, it absolutely changed my life. Do you think I would be sitting here with you doing this like podcast if that hadn't happened? Like, no, like it's opened every door,
So did you?
So for the record, I'm a big proponent of like standardized testing to get into schools because it really did it for me.
No, well, it's funny that trend. I don't know if you've you live in San Francisco?
I live in Seattle.
Seattle, or it's an equally progressive
Basically,
place.
yeah.
Right. So because there was in New York this big trend, and generally against sort of standardized testing, and then here
I know.
then here in New York there are these 8 specialized schools that are only you get into the test, and the left made a huge deal about the test is racist and we can't have it and it shouldn't be that. And there was a big fight that went on for years, and the test survived. And now I think it's sort of a little bit less of an issue again because I think the left has sort of discredited themselves in so many different ways. Yeah. But so you go to business school. But it's not just that you went to Harvard, it's that you met a guy named Clayton Christensen.
I did, yeah.
And started working for him. So how did that, we taken his class?
I took his class.
Okay.
I took his class. That was the last semester before graduating. I took his class. Very, like the sort of the way that he sees the world in like waves of disruption. Like there's incumbents, there's like disruptors. Disruptors are basically like, pay attention to the spaces that are unattractive to incumbents. So it's all about like doing the thing that like is not popular basically. And it just like really gels with how I see the world. Totally. It really, really does. Totally. Yeah. And I had a job offer to go to McKinsey and I was like, if I go to McKinsey, I'm going to, I mean, it's a great whatever, right? But like I'm basically going to spend the next 2 years like doing like cost cutting and operational like and I was like that. I'm already gagging.
I get it.
Right?
I have I've made a lot of. I think my students mad at me because I've said don't just automatically take the job at BCG or McKinsey or whatever it is. Even if you make less money, do something more interesting that will give you some level of purpose and fulfillment with your life. Right. But the problem is, I'm saying that as an adjunct because I don't give a shit if they fire me or not, right? But the whole institution, whether it's Harvard, Columbia, whatever, is telling you the exact opposite, right? Yeah. Like the only point in life is to achieve as much status and wealth as possible. And if you achieve that, you will be happy. And if you don't, you will be miserable and nothing else matters. And that couldn't be further from the truth. No. But nonetheless, it is a myth that lots of people end up getting sucked into.
I mean, I feel like, so a few things. One is, the entire point of going to a job like McKinsey or BCG is like for more doors to open. And I was like, how many more doors do I need to open? I was like, look at all the doors, I don't know.
So you turned down McKinsey and go to Microsoft? No,
I turned out and went to work for Christensen.
Got it. Okay.
So he had a tiny little consulting firm called InnoSight. I don't know. I really like the guy. I love the class. I was like, I went and booked a meeting with him, office hours. To talk to him about like my interests and like wanted to get his advice and I have this little consulting firm. Do you want to meet with them? And I was like, sure. and I got a job offer, and I was like, okay,
And what was the kind of work you were doing there?
It was strategy consult. Like they're all ex-BCG people, right? Like Christensen was a BCG guy.
Right.
So it was strategy consulting, but it was all top line strategy consulting. So like 100% like new product launches, like new kind of growth stuff.
Right. How do you build stuff, not tear down stuff?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like it was entirely either, it was one of three things, either designing your own portfolio of disruptive innovations, right? So like product launches, service launches, studying the competitive field to ward off disruptive threats, right? So sort of just pure like strategy and deck building. And then the third was creating and safeguarding innovation processes inside of the company. So like a really good example is Procter & Gamble. So I was one of our clients. And
was it ironic after having worked in their call center to be telling them what to do?
Yeah, like I met like the CEO. Like I was like, so weird. Like
you need to make the bathroom in the San Jose call center a lot better.
I was like, you really need to like increase the pay down there. Yeah. Small thing, but like my salary when I was at P&G in Costa Rica was $700 a month. That was my entire salary. And like, it didn't even qualify to like for income taxes. It's just like so wild what HBS did for me. Seriously, like, anyways. So I went to work for Christensen. I did it for as long as my visa allowed, and then I got turned down for the H-1B. So that was the first of like many immigration issues that I've had in the 15 years.
So what year was that?
This would have been 2008.
Got it. Okay. And was it because of the whole financial crisis? Like what?
No, it's because like it's a lottery, and like you like if you're not part of like a machine that is like dedicated to farming visas, and you're just kind of applying on your own from this tiny little consulting firm, like you don't have a leg up.
Yeah.
So they applied for me and then like lost. And then I just like my OPT ran out and I didn't have a way to work here permanently. Did you have to go back to Costa Rica? No, I had to find a job with like somebody who could
sponsor you.
Yeah, who could sponsor me in like a bigger way. And so basically the only option was to go to a bigger company.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I went to Microsoft. I went to Microsoft for 4 years. I have a lot of gratitude and admiration for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I was not made to work in big companies. So It was kind of a dark time in my career.
And was it so like, right. I mean, it's an unquestionably impressive company. And even within the range of like the really, really big tech companies, they seem like the least evil of the batch these days. Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're great. It's just like, it is really,
It's a bit, right. How much of it was just like navigating a bureaucracy?
100% of it. And also without knowing what I was, like, because I was 2 years out of business school. Right. I didn't know anything. Yeah, I was just sort of learning how to like influence without authority. That basically was the entire time there. Way too overstaffed in every single like, people were just like fighting with each other for work. Like it was hard to find like a meaningful thing that was yours.
BCG to come in and tell
them
how
to probably
cut all their costs. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. They probably did. Ironically, we did end up hiring InnoSight while I was there for like a project. And so I got to like boss over my old colleagues, which is really exciting. It was really fun to see them again and work with them from like the other side. So I was at Microsoft. We applied for a green card. And then the layoffs started, right? So like Microsoft, people are not going to remember this, but like Microsoft had never had layoffs in its entire history. And the first time that they did layoffs was January of 2009. I'd been there for a month. And when they did their first layoffs, I didn't get laid off, thankfully. But every green card application that they had put in got stuck in litigation with the government because you cannot apply for green cards if you're laying off like thousands of Americans. And so here comes like immigration story number 2. 4 years waiting for a green card. Normally it takes 6 months.
So you're working legally.
Yes, with an H.
Can you leave the country or no?
I could leave the country, but the primary concern was if I was laid off, if I was fired, I would have 6 weeks to find another job with a sponsor or leave the country.
Did that at all change the way that you worked in the sense of, God, yes. Right? Because like my guess is that you and I probably have somewhat similar working styles, which is why we don't work in big organizations. But part of it will just be like, I'm just going to tell you what I think, and like you might not like it, but therefore your risk of getting fired with that type of behavior is a lot greater. But if you're a citizen, you get fired, like you don't have to leave the country, right? You just have to get a new job, right? For you, do you think it changed the way you behaved at work and the way you worked?
I mean, so for one thing, it gave me like generalized anxiety and panic attacks, right? Yeah. Like every time there was a wave of layoffs, I would just like go into crisis mode. I think that I was just like really meek for that whole time, right? Like just sort of like be quiet, do your work, don't attract attention, like do your best, try to get, your little pay increase and your promotion, and like try to do interesting work and just like don't rock the boat.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I mean, I met great people and worked on interesting things. But it was not it was very, very far from thriving.
Right.
I do think this is the Ballmer years, right?
Yeah.
And also remember, like I started right after the 2008 downturn, right? And so like that entire period, 2008 to 2010, we're in this like post-crash era, right? Like the housing crisis and all like Lehman and like all the banks falling. And so like my HBS classmates are getting like laid off left and right? Like I'm just like holding on to my job for dear life. And then eventually
green card arrives.
Yes.
So where are we like now? Like in 2014?
I was 13.
13. And then were you, the minute you got it, you're like, thanks, I'll see you later?
Oh my God, that was like 3 weeks.
Were they mad or they knew?
Well, you know what's funny? Like I was at CES with my boss, with like clients. Yeah. And we are at a restaurant at dinner with clients. Yeah. And I like check my email and there's an email from the lawyers like, congratulations, your green card. I'm like, oh my God, my green card. I tell my boss, so like we're all cheering. She's like, you're going to quit, right? I was like, no.
Never. Not for at
all.
Least 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And like got back to Seattle and I started looking for jobs. Right. I was like, I'm going to talk to every consumer tech startup that I can find. And like 3 or 4 weeks later, I was out of there.
And then so then you're finally free to go be entrepreneurial.
It was wonderful.
And what was that experience
so great.
like?
So I did, I mean, it was like at first it was an adjustment, right? Like, it's going from a very well funded, right? Yeah. Like a very cash-rich company.
And functional, right?
Yeah, like with a lot of support in every different way, like very established processes. I went to Big Fish Games. I was like one of the first product executives.
Right. And you don't hear about, like Amazon, you only hear that everyone who works there is miserable, right? You don't hear about Microsoft being a bad
No, it's not a bad place to work.
Right, yeah.
Not at all. In fact, like average tenure there, I bet is really, really high. People stay for a long time. It's just for like it's a better place for people who enjoy like high support, people. Right? Yeah, exactly. Sure. And so it was an adjustment in the beginning to go from that to like Big Fish was like maybe a 300-400 employee company. Doing what? Gaming. So they were taking their PC game business and transforming into a mobile game company. Mm-hmm. And that was both super fun, but also everyone hated me. I'd spent the last chunk of my time at Microsoft working in the Kinect world. Okay. And I'm a gamer. So like, you are a gamer, yeah. I mean, I'm a casual gamer. Yeah. Like I love all the casual games. And I'm a consumer tech person. So like I really understand. Yeah. I understand people. Like how do you get people to like grok something? Right. And that is like consumer tech. Actually, that's all tech now, right? Like that's all tech that faces people is like all about how do you like connect, engage, I mean, I try to, because I've had businesses outside of venture, I try to remind my colleagues sometimes that are, only in that world. The only point of every single business in the world is to sell something to somebody. To someone, yeah. Yes. Exactly. It could be a service, it could be a product, it could be B2B, it could be B2C, whatever. But that's it. And if you can't do that, you can have a million other metrics. It doesn't make a fucking difference. Totally. Yeah. Totally. And gaming is this like, the value prop is just like pure entertainment. Like it's 100% marketing. 100% marketing. So yeah, it was super interesting. I learned a ton. I got poached out of there to go to what was a really hot startup at the time, Julep Beauty, the branded beauty e-commerce. It was like an Andreessen portfolio company. I was like reporting to the CEO, led their entire digital side, like their e-commerce and like everything. And, had a ton of fun. And like around a year after joining Julep, I was like, okay, so I don't know if this is the audience to talk about this, but the truth is that I was pregnant.
I think Ari's going to handle it.
Yeah. Okay. So, but like,
Every one of them
right, like,
was at least in a womb once.
well, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the like hormonal, basically I was just like, Jesus, I work really hard and I don't want to change that part. Like that right. I'm okay with.
Yeah.
But maybe I should be working for something that I really care about. Like maybe I shouldn't work for Jane. Maybe I should be Jane. Jane being my boss, the CEO.
Okay.
Who is, by the way, I invested in her second company out of the fund. She's an LP in my fund. Like adore her. She's a mentor for life. Jane Park. Love her. And so I left that job and like 3 months pregnant or 4 months pregnant because I wanted to start a company. Now,
Did you know what you wanted to start?
No, I had no idea. And there was zero reason to do that in the moment that I did.
Right.
And I probably should have waited. But I think that it would have been a really, really, at the pace that I was at Julep, and I'd already had like a loss before. So like it felt like, if I want to spend some time sort of thinking about this, then I need to do it now because I'm not going to do it with a baby.
You said, a couple months ago, you were talking business students and you only live once. Like you also only have phases of life once, right?
Exactly.
And so making the right call for that moment of your phase of your life makes sense.
And it was this like, I no longer had any student debt, right? I was married. I had a green card. I wasn't going to get kicked out of the country.
The stability must have felt incredible.
Exactly. And I was like, in a loving relationship. Like there was a lot of like things that made it easier to make that decision. Very supportive partner. By the way, like secret to success, supportive partner. 100%, nothing else. Like that's it. And so I left and I spent like, the first 6 months, all I did was like have coffee with people, literally. And like, I built the network that made everything else possible afterwards.
Your kid must be so hyper if you were drinking all of that coffee.
Totally is. She is like mini me. She is like a carbon copy of me, my personality. She even has like my face. And then she was born, and like around 3 months after she was born, the idea for the company that I launched was when I started thinking about that and ideating that. And then I this is edtech gaming company. I bootstrapped it. I launched it. It like, the kids loved it. The moms loved it. The mommy bloggers loved it, which, notoriously difficult crowd. And it was doing great. And then I went to raise capital for it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, cute mommy thing. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, it's not, yes, it is cute. And yes, I'm a mom, but I'm also this like crazy workaholic. Like nobody's going to work harder. Nobody's more driven. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Also this thing sells, like it's up and to the right every single month. Like there's a real there, right? Like guess who spends a lot of money?
Right.
And it just sort of felt like going to Silicon Valley and like trying to raise capital in like Seattle was like, I turned from the hot hire to like the cute mommy. And I was like, whoa, what just happened here?
Right.
And this is in the before times, like before Me Too, before all this stuff. And so I really had no idea what was going on. I was like, somebody just needs to tell me so I can stop wasting my time, right? Like this is such a waste of time. And, I can kind of go into the details, but like long story short, the company didn't go anywhere. That company, I killed it. But I did start this meetup group with other women who were trying to raise venture capital at the time. And that is now...
That would lead to the Female Founders Alliance?
Exactly. That is the Female Founders Alliance.
Got it.
That became what is now the largest community of venture-backed female founders in the country. And I've been doing that ever since.
Was it hard or easy to get other people engaged in it? Was it like there was huge demand for something like this?
Yes. To your point, or what we were talking earlier about, like, by that point in my career, and even to this day, like, I have launched a lot of things, right? From like venture kits on my own with minimal budget, you know, from my basement, all the way to being part of the Bing launch, which is a $2 billion launch, like hundreds of people. Had never felt surge. Like this like, it wants to exist. People want to be a part of whatever I'm doing. People want to be a part of it. Like they really want to be a part of it.
Right, because that had purpose, which shockingly makes you feel better than getting promoted
100%.
to, you know, from VP to senior VP at BCG.
And it's this like, it was this funny thing, because remember, this is around the time, like before All Raise, before all this stuff, but it was in the time of Lean In, which was huge.
Right.
But Lean In was like not in the world of venture. It was kind of a waste of time for people who just want to get their company off the ground, right? Like, and so it just had this like really special feeling from day one. And I was like, you know, this is super fun. There seems to be huge demand for this connection that people are having when they're a part of our events and our like programs. And I just want to do this full time. And so I went to see who would give me money. It was not a lot of money, but it was enough that I could hire some contractors, like do some things, incorporated. And I've been bootstrapping that thing with sponsor revenue ever since.
Yeah. So walk us through the business model, the activities, kind of what your founders are getting out of the process, all of that.
Yeah. The goal is to help as many founders as we can at no cost to them.
Okay.
And also like in a meaningful way. Like I don't.
Yeah. So how would you, right? Because there's all kinds of nonsense stuff, but what's meaningful in your view?
So meaningful in my view is, particularly for first-time founders, which the majority of women are first-time founders, right? Like, that's just kind of how that's how the niche is going to grow, right? Like more people have to do. It is teaching them it's almost like venture deals for women, honestly, like the lingo, the like motions, like how not to waste your time. We do it through a workshop, like our kind of VC 101 workshop. And we do that in as little as like 1 to 2 hours in person in different parts of the country, or like in a 5-part workshop with like via our like small accelerator that we have. I think we've had like, I don't know, maybe like 1,000 women that have gone through that over the years. It might be somewhere between 800 and 1,000. So that's one. And the second is your first few connections. So like I no longer believe that we are going to be able to find investors for everyone, right? Like in the beginning, I was like, I can connect people to their investors and that's going to lead. But I think that like I would need a lot more resources to get to the caliber of program where we can really be a Y Combinator. So now...
And even there, I mean, look, for every 100 deals we look at, we do one maybe, right? So like the reality is no one can really...
No one can know.
Do that because at best you might be able to get them a meeting, but even if the meeting goes great, there's probably some reason eventually why the fund's gonna be like, well, it doesn't work for us for this reason, right? And that's just how it works. So like that's not even, I don't think anyone could achieve that.
No. And I don't know that I knew that 8 years ago, but how it's kind of shifted over time is like, I've come all the way back to, I'm going to help as many people as I can, but they have to help themselves too. And so I think it's more like, I'm going to help you have the first few introductions, and what you do with them is up to you. Right. So like maybe that's not going to be your investor, but maybe this is someone who's going to open up their LinkedIn for you. And I think that is what's missing, just like a sort of like a foot in the door.
Yeah.
And we can do that for a lot more people.
Right.
And so those are the kind of the two things. And then like people connect with each other and like, there's like a big Slack and resource and stuff like that. And there's the business model, very simple. It's a for-profit company, but it is certainly not making any profit, right? Like very, very bootstrapped minimally with corporate sponsorships from AWS. That's our primary sponsor. Antares Capital is a PE lender that's been super supportive the past couple of years. Okay. And they've supported our Catalyst program so that it's free for entrepreneurs. And then various banks and law firms. Cooley has been amazing. They've been a sponsor for 5 years. Yeah. So that's the Female Founders Alliance. I think like early on, like I said, like it's not a nonprofit because I don't believe that nonprofit is the right signaling for what I want to do in my life. Like I do think that there's a space for nonprofit and there's a space for charitable contributions. I don't believe that entrepreneurs should be recipients of charitable contributions in any way, shape, or form.
Well, not just that, but I would say there are certain types of funds that to me feel like they're a little more charitable in a way or ESG in a way. And when
100%.
a startup I'm looking at has money from them, I have to admit I'm biased against them.
And I feel like that hurts the entrepreneur way more.
Yeah, the signal effect
like
is terrible.
it is
'Cause it's like,
terrible.
oh, you're not like a real business. You're just.
And that is why my fund is not called the Female Founders Line or Female Anything.
Right.
But I did realize early on, okay, so this is an amazing thing. I love doing it. It's so meaningful, so amazing. I would love to do this for the rest of my life. But also, I'm never going to make any money out of this. Like, this is not, I can't even pay myself.
Right.
And so, how do I align my success with the success of the people that I'm helping? And that is to invest in them.
Yeah.
And so I decided to raise a venture capital fund, and that is how Graham & Walker was born.
What was raising your first fund like?
Hard, weird. I mean, I don't come from money.
Yeah.
Certainly don't come from like the level of money that there is in America.
Yeah.
Like I grew up middle class, comfortable, like fine, never lacked for anything. But I did not know, and I still don't know. And the vast majority of my LPs from the first fund are people that I met like in the 2 years prior to the fund, with like 2 exceptions, 2 HBS classmates. Everybody else was like, did not know me. I did not know them. Like there's no friends and family involved.
Yeah.
And so, it's sort of, it was extraordinarily difficult. But also kind of that's the cost of doing business, like that's the thing that I have to do in order to do what I want to do. And so I just kind of got through it. I started in January 2020. And
was there did you hit a huge wall in March?
So, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing.
I think we were fundraising at that time, and I'm now trying to
for
remember.
Tusk?
Yeah, but I'm trying to remember because we had a 2021 vintage fund, so we must have been. But yeah, I don't know. Fundraising is always so unpleasant that I think I mold together.
It's just like I think I didn't know, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. It was entirely like a black box, and so I was just sort of like people make introductions and like, and so what happened? At that point, my younger daughter was a few months old, and so I basically just we stayed home and did all the meetings on Zoom, and I stopped fundraising in the beginning because especially with the sort of the George Floyd era of 2020, a lot of people jumped on that, and I was like, that just doesn't feel right to me to I want people to invest in a VC fund.
Right.
And so I kind of just stopped, and then came back to it around September of that year. Did a first close in October, November of that year, and then started investing in 2021.
And what's this stage you guys are usually investing at?
Pre-seed and seed. Primarily pre-seed with this first fund.
Check sizes?
So I raised a $10 million fund, which is the most that you can raise while having up to 250 investors.
Yeah.
And I just figured, I've never done this before.
Yeah.
I need to have a check size that is low enough that people can actually make can make angel investments into it.
Yes. And that you can succeed at returning capital.
Totally.
At DPI because it's this giant hurdle that, will give you a nice, comfortable, cushy management fee, but ultimately really makes it hard for anyone to win.
I was one of my advisors at the time, he's like, okay, VC 101. You can make money one of 2 ways. You can either get rich off the fee or you can get rich off the carry. Which one are you? And I was like, I think the carry. And he's like, okay, great. That was the right answer. So now here's how we do that, right? You want to keep your AUM below 50, for this stage, right? So I've spent a lot of time learning about this stuff since. I
think in a weird way, a couple $100 million is maybe the hardest fund size to have.
Totally.
Because it's not that easy to raise. It's enough money that when you lose someone who's a $20, $30 million check for whatever reason, that's a hit. But it's a big enough hurdle to clear that it's hard to really generate a ton of carry. But it's also not enough money to generate meaningful management fees. that especially if you're running the business in a responsible way and trying to provide a lot of platform services and everything else to portfolio companies, there's not that much left over.
Yeah, totally. I like these. I also feel like for the, I looked at like, what is my deal flow? Like, what is my pipeline? Where am I competitive? Where do I help the most, right? Like, what do I like? And I'm really good at like 0 to 1, 1 to 10. Like those, I have never been a person that is comfortable at scale.
Right.
And nor am I I'm not, I can do spreadsheets like the best of them. In fact, I love spreadsheets, but like, I'm not going to be happy if my job is like, doing like net present value calculations for like Series C company. Like it just like, it's not what I want to do. I like to sort of.
That's right. The more you get into late, it's like for me at least, like overall finance was never that interesting because if in my mind it's like, okay, I'm shifting numbers from column A to column B and I'm skimming some off the top. Like, okay, if that's how you make a living, fine. But you're not really building anything, right? You're just doing financial
100%,
engineering, right?
like 100%.
Early stage, super hard because most of it fails. But when you actually do at, pre-seed like you or seed or A like us, build a company that ultimately makes it all the way through the gauntlet, you're like, oh, I was a part of helping make this thing real.
Totally. And like, as someone who had tried it, like built a company, helped a couple of very early stage companies like grow, get to exit. It's just like a really fun stage. And I feel like, again, most of the companies that I see are first-time founders, maybe sometimes second-time founders. Most of them are outsiders, right? Like they're people like me. And I feel like I understand them. I have like a really, really high degree of fit with them. And for a fund our size, right, like we have been out there, like I've been out there helping founders for 8 years at no cost to them, right? Like the amount of like goodwill that you put out into the ecosystem, it really comes back to you.
Starting off with a huge advantage.
Exactly. And so I feel like, and also the Female Founders Alliance is essentially our platform. And it is a platform that is supported with sponsorship revenue. It's a separate legal and fiscal entity. And so we are like an operation that is like way bigger than what you could ever do with a fund my size, right? Like we were like platform first, fund second.
Yeah, it's almost two different entities.
Exactly. And it just sort of like much, much, much bigger than like our tiny little first fund.
$10 million AUM, the management fees can't really.
Nothing. It's like nothing, right? Like we pay for like some flights and legal and accounting. Like that's basically it.
Yeah. All right. So then this other big thing happens. So this is now we're in like the last, well, it's got to be no more than 4 or 5 months because the election was a month ago and she didn't become the nominee till late July. So we're all familiar with the story of Biden chooses to run, terrible decision. Finally is forced to back down. Harris moves into the spot. And then you start something called VCs For Harris that moves fast. I think I saw it and signed up for it the same day. I was like, sure. So what was the thinking? What was the impetus? And what was the experience?
So basically, like if you recall, throughout the month of July, I think, when like Biden is still in the race and there was the assassination attempt and there's like a kind of growing chorus of like the really, really loud voices that are like, it felt like they were turning MAGA. Like I actually, for the record, have no problem with like the Republican Party or conservative values. In fact, I'm quite like centric. I'm very middle ground. Yeah. But like to me, I come from Costa Rica. Democracy is the number one value. Like election denialism was a real, like, I was like, what are you guys are playing with fire in this country? You really don't know what you're playing with. Like, I was growing up in Costa Rica. Literally every country around us had like democracy crises in my lifetime.
Right. And many of them still continue to.
Yeah, exactly. And like Costa Rica, I don't know if people know this, but it is the highest immigration per capita in the American continent. The immigration problem in Costa Rica is far worse than it is in America because it is the only stable democracy in Latin America.
Right. So people are making their way up.
All of them. Up or down, right? Like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, like everywhere. Honduras, Colombia, Venezuela, everyone. And like they've lost everything. They've lost everything, right? And like they're coming to Costa Rica because like their kids are going to be drafted by the army or like because they're concerned about gangs or whatever. Yeah. And I'm just like looking at the U.S. going through this and like seeing, you know, these people that I respect ignore that for the sake of crypto or right. Like I was like, you know, like I get it. This administration has not been great for a big chunk of our industry. Like I get it, but in my order of what is important, that was just not the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, I remember trying to explain this to reporters a lot when they kept asking about like, you know, both sides of it, VCs who were backing Trump and then Harris was like, look, there's sort of a choice, which is there's your pocketbook and your business and all of that. And like Biden has not been great for venture.
No,
like, there's no real. And then there's the fact that you're also a human being living and existing in this country in this time.
Exactly.
And you kind of have to weigh the two. And people can come out on either side of that. But when you're asking sort of why are these people for this one and this for that, basically that's the underlying choice they've made.
That's exactly right. And also like if people, I don't, you know, in the timing of it, Harris had no platform. Right? Like she had like, I think this was days after Biden dropped out. And I just felt like, you know, it was such a groundswell of MAGA. And, you know, not for nothing, but I lead the largest community of venture-backed female founders in the country. Everybody's concerned about reproductive rights. Like the founders are coming to me like, is this all of venture capital? I'm like, I don't think it is. I think that there's a lot of us who really care about this stuff and like climate and like, you know, like democracy, like these bigger values. Like, and I felt like nobody was saying anything. And then one day I tweeted, I was like, it's funny because I'm like trying to do bedtime with my kids and sometimes I don't, you know, I have to like lock myself and like turn off the lights so that they think that I'm sleeping. So I'm like tweeting from my bed, like hiding from the girls. And I just tweeted like, you know what? I'm going to start VCs for Democracy. And I went on GoDaddy, which is just like a really expensive habit I have. You know, some people smoke, I buy URLs. And I bought VCs for Kamala, VCs for Harris, VCs for Democracy, like all this stuff. And I tweeted it and I got a few, you know, got some attention. And then I was like, I'm going to write a pledge. I don't, what the hell I was thinking. Listen, I don't sleep a lot. I have small kids. Like, I wrote a pledge. I sent it to some friends. I put it on like a Google form. And the pledge was like very moderate, very pro-business. Like I wanted to make it clear, like I'm a VC, I care about these things, but also I really care about democracy and like, and I care about these like social issues that I think a lot of our founders really, really care about. I sent it to some people and then like, folks were like excited. And one of those people was, not Reed himself, but, his chief of staff, Arya. So Reed had become an investor in my fund earlier, and
Reed meaning Reed Hoffman.
Reed Hoffman, yeah. Yes. And so I was like, "Do you think that you guys would support this?" And then somebody else, this woman Shyla Nieves Burney, sent it to Mark Cuban, and he signed it. And then like I had in that form, you know, I wrote like, if you have any questions, email team@grandwalker.com, which is my like fund email, right? And so this was tweet was on a Tuesday. This sort of like first couple of signatures was Friday morning. By the end of the day on Friday, I was at a birthday party for one of my kids' friends. And like, I'm sitting there and there's like Ron Conway signed, Vinod Khosla signed. I'm like, holy crap. Like,
yeah,
I really can't embarrass myself in front of these people now.
Also each thing legitimizes it to make the next person feel comfortable.
Exactly. Like Aileen Lee had signed. And by the way, this is like me and like 10 other VCs and a couple of people, Eric Reese, who is now like an incredible mentor. Like I really made outstanding friends out of this whole thing. So Eric Lee Reese of the Lean Startup, like sent it to a bunch of really high profile people and they came in. Right. And then Wendy Anderson, who's an executive at Palantir. I still have not met her in real life, but it's like just like somebody that I developed this incredible relationship with through this. She sent it to Vino, he signed. So like within a day, there's like 10 really big names in there.
Yeah.
And then the New York Times finds it because it, like somebody must have sent it to them. It has my email on it. And they write and they're like, hey, we'd like to write about this. And I was like, no. Like, you cannot, like, this is not a this. They're like, there's no there. Like, there's like 10 signatures on this like Google form is literally all this is. And so I called a friend who's a crisis PR. I was like, I think I have a crisis. And I'm like literally at my kid's friend's birthday party at the park where like the other parents are around. I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? So anyways, the New York Times agreed to sit on it for like 3 or 4 days. And in those 3 or 4 days, I was like, all right, we got to get to a round number. Like I was like, okay, we need 100 signatures. So just hustle to like reach out to every VC that we knew with these like volunteers. And we got to 100 signatures. I did a New York Times interview on like a Tuesday, and Wednesday morning, the article came out. I tweeted, it went massively viral. It just like reached, just all around the world, like a huge like press interest. And on that day that it came out, it was Wednesday, July 31st. And the reason I know this is because I was on a flight alone with my 2 kids going to Costa Rica that day for their summer vacation. I paid for airplane Wi-Fi that day. It was worth the investment.
You normally don't?
No, normally I use like the one. I don't have like flights that long, and especially if I'm with my kids, like there is no focusing on the computer, and it was just like another kind of down the rabbit hole thing. By the end of that week, we were like 500 signatures. We're now up to nearly 1,000.
And what did
like,
other than the group got press?
Yeah.
And there were updates because I saw those.
Yeah.
Were we able to activate them in any way to do anything?
Yeah, I think early on, especially in the first week, like people started coming to me like, you have to drop everything and start fundraising. All the campaign cares about is money. I was like, okay, but I still have to be a VC after this. Like, feels a little weird. Like, you can have any job you want if you just raise a bunch of money. I was like, okay, but I really like my job. Like, I don't actually want. Win. Yeah, I was like, I don't know. And so I didn't go deep into fundraising. Like we did one Zoom because that felt like the way to activate people. That was super, super fun. And raise a little bit of money on that Zoom. And then afterwards, like I just kind of let people do their own events using the platform and used it as a way to like get butts in seats, right? Like, hey, you want to organize this, you want to do that. The other thing that we did that was really interesting was survey the entire group with Kieran Snyder is another LP in my fund. But also more importantly, she's a data scientist. She's a co-founder and ex-CEO. I think she's now chief scientist emeritus at a company called Textio, which is an AI company. And she is like a data storyteller, among many other things. And she helped me to kind of dig into what was behind this like surge and like what were the things that people really cared about. Because, it happened really fast. It happened before Harris had any kind of platform or policy initiatives. And like, let's be honest, because to some degree, we all turned into surrogates for the time. But in reality, what it was like, it was standing up for democracy and saying like, hey, there are bigger issues at stake for us than how much money we pocket.
Yep.
And like, granted, I think ultimately the election was about the economy, but it was about the economy for everyday people. VCs don't actually are that many votes. Like
a couple of thousand venture capital.
Exactly. Like it's not, so what I wanted to know was like, okay, why did people sign? Because like, I started the thing because I felt like I don't want them to speak for me. Again, middle child, odd person out. Like I was like, you don't speak for me. Right. I speak for myself. And then I was like the megaphone for like 1,000 VCs. And I'm like, okay, well, what do I say now? Because I definitely don't want to speak for everyone if I'm not like correctly representing the values of what people care about. And so we like went in and dug in and like, what is it that like, what do we care about here? And certainly some of the issues that like the current administration were not good for us, those came out in that survey. Sure. For sure. Like all VCs want like, better immigration policies for highly qualified workers, the crypto stuff that like,
right.
you know, the M&A environment, like all this stuff, like we all care about it. But also people really cared about democracy as a value. People really cared about not being represented by the group with a megaphone. Like the number one most agreed statement was, these guys don't speak for us. Like this is not what we want our industry to be represented as. And that really stayed with me. I'm like, okay, I think the problem here is that like the voices are not actually representing what most people want to see and want to do. And I think, you know, within venture capital, like, yes, we're all making money here, but I think that there's also a lot of idealism about like what we're doing here is building the world that my daughters are going to graduate college into. Like that's literally like we are, you know, the public companies of tomorrow are being seeded by you and me today. Hopefully, literally.
Hopefully.
And like that matters, right? Like it matters. It's not just about making money. It's about choosing the leaders of tomorrow. It's about like seeding the technologies of tomorrow. It's about like planting the boards of tomorrow. And I think, you know, a lot of people have more of a conscience around like, how do we do that? And like, who do we back? And like,
were you surprised by the outcome?
No, not at all. I was not.
Yeah. So what, and I think the answer is you're not sure yet because we were talking about this before we started recording, but like, all right, so you've built this organization. What do you do with it?
So I wouldn't call it an organization. It's an email list, right?
Okay.
Like, and I honestly, I don't really know because I think, you know, there's a chunk of people who came on board because they are ultra liberal and they were going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
And I kind of made it clear from the start that like, this is not that.
Right.
Like nobody here is going to be shamed for thinking differently than I am. Like we are going to be like, there is no sanctimony in this group, right? Like there's no purity tests here. Especially because I probably would not pass it. Like, you know, just to be clear. And so I think for now I'm just writing. I have like an email that I send to everyone and like people are highly engaged and kind of writing back. And I don't know, we'll see what kind of relationships and ideas come out of it. Like I'm not going to jump into doing anything. I think like just sort of.
Look, it is a group of generally smart, thoughtful people who do have some
with like
level
aligned
of concern.
values.
And so, you know, there's things that can come of it.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I would hope that a lot of collaboration comes out of it. I think it would be great if I can like convene people in person in the different cities, not just so they can communicate with me, but like, hey, there's a lot of like with each other, right?
Yeah,
So that's a little bit of what I'm thinking.
Cool.
At the same time, like I'm a VC, I run a fund, I have a fiduciary duty. Like I have more than one full-time job at this point, right? So like, exactly.
I'm familiar with all that.
So I'm not announcing any kind of like massive nonprofit launch or anything like that anytime
Wait,
soon.
then what's the news value of this podcast?
I know, I'm sorry. And
talking?
like every, you know, like every press who has subscribed to that email, so many people have reached out like, do you want to talk about what you're doing next? I'm like, it's called Graham and Walker. Like you know, that's what I'm doing. That is the thing that I want to do.
Right. They have a hard time understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And everything else hopefully should be in the service of seeding great entrepreneurs and like getting to do what I love to do.
Cool. How do people follow your work?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Leslie Feinzaig. I would say follow me on X. I guess I'm still there. Although Blue Sky is now also kind of being built. So I would say both. And then, you know, just follow me on those platforms at Leslie Feinzaig. I think at some point I will kind of turn that email into something that people can subscribe to. So far you cannot actually subscribe to it. So we'll make it into a Substack and people can sign up for it. And then I'll send it to you and you can
All right. I can
share it with your folks.
We'll do it. Cool. Leslie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Firewall is recorded at my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytuss.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.